All right, shalom, shalom, giving all praises, honor, and glory to our power Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Rachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the whole free elect, the tabernacles of David, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, wherever you may be. Wherever you may be, to you I say shalom, mashallah, shalom. All right, so I'm going to get into something here that I was listening to. I want to say I listened to the whole thing. I believe I did, but we're not going to get into the whole thing because he starts getting into some other things. But the first probably about 15 minutes, maybe a little after that, I thought it was a pretty good topic. And as you see this right here, it says Trump brags, I ended the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany, making EU dependent on U.S. oil and gas. Now, those of you that may remember, all right, this event, which when it happened, we actually talked about it. Quite a few of the brothers, talked about it. I talked about it because Nord Stream are two pipelines, all right? So in the pipelines, you have A and B. So A has two pipelines that are pretty much connected together, and then B also two. So it's really four pipes, okay? But it's A and B, so two and two, okay? And so, it's for LNG liquid, natural gas, all right, to be or intended to flow from Russia to, I think it was Germany, okay? And there's a couple key scriptures that I don't want to get into concerning the situation here. I may get into those scriptures at the end. Um, and we'll just try to get through this clip here quick as possible. Like I said, we're not going to watch the whole thing. But yeah, so, but those of you that may remember the Nord Stream, this is around the time, Nord Stream. I want to say it was after the Crimea Bridge because, had the annexation, Russia trying to annex Crimea, then they blew up the bridge, and then the Nord Stream. And then they started planting mines in the Baltic Sea. So there was a lot of, excuse me, espionage stuff going on over there. And remember when it happened, okay, the U.S. was, they threw the rocks and hid their hands. But he's also going to speak about that as well because, at the time, Biden was in office and he made a remark that, he didn't actually say how they were going to stop it. But let's play the clip. We get into all of that, all right?
Well, remember, I'm the one that ended Nord Stream 2. Well, remember, I'm the one that ended Nord Stream 2. Going to a place called Germany, come to think of it. I'm sorry I did that. But I ended Nord Stream 2. Nobody else did.
The Donald Trump administration has essentially been boasting of the fact that its policies are doing serious damage to Europe. Now, it's not new for the U.S. government to carry out policies that exploit Europe and benefit the U.S. at the expense of its so-called allies. But what is different about the Trump administration is that Trump so frequently says the quiet part loud. And unlike Democrats, who often say that U.S. policy is supposedly motivated by democracy and human rights, Trump administration officials say openly, no, we are an empire, we are a hegemon, we don't act benevolently, we act in order to support our own economic interests, to exploit other countries in a zero-sum game. In the Make America Great Again MAGA view of the world, one side has to win, that is the United States.
Now, mind you, I believe it was like right before or right when he got into office. I believe it was right when he got into office. He started to speak about all types of different things about expanding, expanding. Try to name the Gulf of what was it? Was it the Gulf of Mexico or something like that? To Gulf of America, something like that. He kept talking about trying to buy out Canada, and trying to buy out, was it, I think it was Greenland or Iceland, one of those places. Okay, so and this is something natural. When you're dealing with like when you look, especially when you look back to the ancient Roman Empire or just empires in general. Like we speak about this all the time. Okay, in the event where they've sucked out all the money out of their treasury, they have two things that they can do. One, raise the taxes on the people, and two, go to war with another country, sack them, and take their riches to replenish, the treasury or whatnot. Okay, so now I'm not saying this is exactly what they're doing. All right, but all right, what's going on, my man? All right, but I'm not saying this is exactly what they're doing, but those are two actions that they can take to replenish, what them pretty much having a lack. All right, thereof. Okay, so the point I'm trying to get to is as he stepped into the limelight, right? Stepped to the limelight. Um, because the elites are in control, so they pretty much gave him a very strict agenda, as we can all see with what he's been doing. Okay, So they've been pushing and pushing and pushing forward with their agenda, and you know, brothers have been watching and seeing a lot of things, you know, unfolding, because you know the time of trouble that we spoke about is near. Now that's not what this video is getting into. I was just making a point with that. As a matter of fact, let me play some more of the video.
The other side has to lose, and this applies to everyone, including longtime U.S. allies. The perfect symbol of this was in June when Donald Trump had a meeting in the White House with the leader of Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz. And there, sitting right in front of the leader of Germany, Trump boasted of sabotaging the Nord Stream pipeline. This was a pipeline project that was launched by the German government to connect Russia to Germany, because it was Germany that wanted cheap energy from Russia in order to power German industry.
Now, mind you, they're supposed to be allies or what, or whatever. Okay, so I want to grab this here, which I pull this up. Which I understand this. I was just, you know, doing it for the edification of the camera. So I put in, what is the significance of the Nord Stream pipeline, right? So that we all, you know, have a better understanding. So it says the Nord Stream pipelines comprise the Nord Stream 1, NS1, and Nord Stream 2, NS2, which are ultimately 4 pipes. There's 2 and 2. It says hold significant geopolitical, economic, and environmental importance, particularly in the context of European energy security and Russia's role as a major gas supplier. The Nord Stream pipelines are a network of offshore natural gas pipelines running under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, designed to supply natural gas to Western Europe. The system includes 2 separate projects, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, each consisting of, there you go right there, 2 pipes, for a total of 4 physical pipelines. Nord Stream 1, operational since 2011, and Nord Stream 2, completed in 2021, but never put into service, were intended to double the annual gas transport capacity to 110 billion cubic meters. Geopolitical significance. The pipelines have been a focal point of geopolitical contention, symbolizing Europe's reliance on Russian energy and Russia's use of energy as a political tool. Critics, including the United States and several Eastern European countries, argue that the pipelines would increase Europe's dependence on Russian gas. Okay, thereby empowering Russia and undermining the energy security of transit countries like Ukraine and Poland. Okay, and really, America doesn't care about any other country; it only cares about themselves. Okay, even when you're dealing with their allies. And so, what it is they want that make America great again. Okay, they want to have more countries depend on them, which is beautiful because it lines right up with Revelation chapter 18. Okay, when the Lord destroys Babylon the Great, everybody's going to wail and cry over her, not because they miss her, but because they know that America was their cash cow. Okay, so it really makes sense. It says the project was seen by some as a means for Russia to bypass traditional transit countries, reducing their leverage and transit fees. For instance, Ukraine stood to lose billions in transit fees annually if Nord Stream 2 became operational. Okay, and so you wonder why they you know, blew the thing to smithereens. The U.S. imposed sanctions on companies involved in Nord Stream 2, viewing it as Russian malign influence project. And around this time, everything was Russian. Okay, if you stumped your toe against the wall, oh, it was Russian. All right, if you fell down the steps, it was Russian. They were just blaming everything on Russia. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 significantly altered the geopolitical landscape surrounding Nord Stream. Yeah, because it began with the annexing of Crimea, which remember when Putin sat down with I always forget his name. What's this guy's name? I'm trying to get the end away. I don't want to kill it. Man, what's his name? I always forget his doggone name. That news guy, man. I'm not gonna hang on it. I'm trying to give me a second. I'm trying to think about it. Man, what is this dude's name? I always forget his name. But if it comes back to me, I'll spit it out. But yeah, he went over there and he sat down with an interview with Putin, and he thought, he was kind of, start Putin just BSing and just, walking around and skirting the issue. But what Putin was doing was giving him the whole history that he knew and understood, telling him why that the Crimea and Ukraine and all this territory belongs to us. It always belonged to us. So he was breaking that history down to him. Okay. So yeah. It really began with the Crimea, the annexing of the Crimea. Okay, and that was important, and it angered a lot of people. And eventually, what happened is, well, what they blew up the Crimea Bridge. Okay, and the conflict started to spark up directly between Russia and Ukraine, and as we see, it's still going on today. But that's all part of the bigger picture of World War III. Those are just two countries, against one another. But there's other countries doing the same thing, and all those conflicts are going to lead up to one big conflict, which is the Third World War III. Okay, so yeah, so all that history there, all right, is lining right up. It says here Germany halted the certification process for Nord Stream 2 just 2 days before the invasion. Subsequently, in September 2022, multiple underwater explosions severely damaged uh, three of the four Nord Stream pipelines, rendering them inoperable. While investigations are, and their goal is probably to destroy all four of them, but it says rendering them inoperable. While investigations are ongoing, with some pointing to sabotage, which he's going to talk about that in this video, the incidents effectively nullify the immediate operational prospects of the pipelines. This event underscored the vulnerability of critical energy infrastructure and intensified efforts by European nations to reduce their dependence on Russian fossil fuels. The EU has since adopted sanctions banning the direct and indirect use of the Nord Stream pipelines. So you see how that fell into play, right? Economic significance. We have to read all that. Environmental. Yeah, you can read some more on that yourself. I just want to get the nitty gritty there out of there, so we can go back to the video actually.
This is often referred to as a Russian project, but in reality, Nord Stream was a joint project between, yes, Russia, but also companies in Germany, France, and the Netherlands. This was a European civilian energy project.
And if I'm correct, Germany, France, Netherlands are all part of those, because he's surprised me when he mentioned the word vassals, all right? Because when you're going back to those 10, that were mentioned, I think it's Revelation, one of those chapters in Revelation, which I haven't fully, put in my memory, those 10, but I do know the 7, okay? But yeah, those, which we're going to get those scriptures later. We'll probably close with the scriptures, right? So that'd be the most fresh thing, on your mind out of the whole video. Okay, the scriptures that I want to go into, all right? But yeah, vassal states, man, all right? And that's pretty much, because we've seen, through history, by way of the Holy Spirit opening our eyes to seeing just how America operates, even with their own allies. Okay, that's the point that I was trying to make there. Let's keep going.
And yet, listen to this clip here in which Trump is sitting in front of Germany's chancellor and he boasts of, quote, ending and stopping the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, keep in mind here that what Trump didn't mention is that in 2022, those pipelines were blown up. They were sabotaged. At that time, Joe Biden was president, but listen to Trump take credit here for ending the pipelines.
On Russia, are you willing to put more pressure on Putin to end the war, imposing new sanctions on Russia and also on China? Well, remember, I'm the one that ended Nord Stream 2, going to a place called Germany, come to think of it. I'm sorry I did that. But I ended Nord Stream 2. Nobody else did.
This is how the U.S. government treats its so-called allies in Europe. It boasts of sabotaging civilian energy projects in Europe because, as Trump admitted after in this meeting in the White House, the U.S. wants Europe to be dependent on U.S. energy, on importing liquefied natural gas and oil from the United States, not importing pipeline gas and oil from Russia.
That's essentially the largest pipeline in the world, going to Germany and other countries. And by the way, we have so much oil and gas, you will not be able to buy it all. I mean, you literally, we have so much, and I hope we're going to make that a part of our trade deal because we have more than anybody else. We have actually the most, by far in the world, probably double what anyone else has. So we'll work on that. I'm sure that's something we'll discuss today.
Bear with it.
By far in the world, probably double what anyone else is. So we'll work on that. I'm sure that's something we'll discuss today.
So while the U.S. government tells Europe to be so afraid of Russia, the U.S. government is the one actually exploiting Europe. And this is true also under Democrats. But the difference is that Joe Biden claimed, I'm your best friend, I'm going to do everything I can to support you, Europe. Whereas Trump is no longer even hiding it. He's spitting in Europe's face and telling them they should be grateful. So to begin here, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this Nord Stream case because I think it's the perfect illustration of the extremely unequal relations between the US and Europe. So what exactly was Nord Stream? This was a series of 4 pipelines in 2 different groups that went through the Baltic Sea, connecting Russia to Germany, circumventing Eastern Europe. There were 2 series of 2 pipelines, Nord Stream.
Because I actually want to pull this up so you can see it. As a matter of fact, I think I have.
One was completed in 2011,
I saw the same picture.
and Nord Stream 2 finished construction in 2021, but it was never actually used. And then in September 2022, the pipelines were blown up. They were sabotaged. And officially, no government has taken credit for blowing up the pipelines. However, the renowned American journalist Seymour Hersh, who won the Pulitzer Prize, the top prize in U.S. journalism, he published an article citing sources in the U.S. government who said that the U.S. military blew up Nord Stream. Now, officially, the U.S. government has denied this, and the CIA used newspapers like the Washington Post to pin the blame on Ukraine.
Now, like I said, for those of us that remember when this happened, everybody's like, oh, which way did he go? Which way did he go? All right, nobody knew what the heck was going on, right? America threw the rock and hid their hands. Like, but which there's some people, you know, that be kind of like, nah, this had to be America. But, you know, the thing is with pinning the blame on someone, you got to have the evidence, all right? And there really wasn't the evidence there. But there was a hint at the evidence, which Biden, which, you know, still you can't use it as just factual evidence. But, you know, let's keep going through the video. Listen up.
However, even according to the CIA narrative, and by the way, we should be very skeptical of the CIA, given how often it has lied throughout history, including about the Iraq War. Remember, weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. But despite the long history of CIA lying, even if you accept the CIA's narrative, they admit that the U.S. government knew that Ukraine was preparing this plan to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. So even according to their own narrative, the U.S. government played a role in green lighting this operation because Ukraine would not carry out an operation like this if it did not have at least the implicit support of the U.S. government. At the United Nations Security Council, Russia introduced a resolution that called for an independent international investigation into the sabotage of Nord Stream. However, the Western countries opposed this. Only 3 countries at the UN Security Council supported the call for an international independent investigation. Those countries were Brazil, China, and Russia. The West was opposed. The government of
Now, Brazil, China, and Russia. What does that sound familiar from? BRICS, actually, because it was BRIC, but then they added on South America, okay? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, all right? Sorry, what did I say? South America, South Africa, okay? So the BRICS. And as we mentioned, you know, with all the tariffs and the sanctions and stuff like that, this is what really started to push and motivate the BRICS nations to try to want to move away from the dollar. They're like, well, we're sick of this American dollar thing. Now it's still the reserve currency, but what they've trying to do is, you know, move away from the dollar. All right. So if sanctions get placed on us, well, it's not going to matter because we're still going to do fine without the sanctions or without tariffs or without this, without, you know, all the nonsense and headache coming from Babylon the Great. See? So, you know, the BRICS kind of formulated, you know, so now you have the global North versus the global South. Okay.
Denmark briefly conducted an investigation.
And in which, regardless of what may be said, all right, maybe by American news or whatever, the BRICS nations are doing, very well, globally, more than you might hear them say, all right, like, because American news media will either lie to you or manipulate what the truth is, okay, but they're actually doing pretty well there, where their GDP is I believe it has a bigger percentage in GDP than the global the North.
But then they closed the investigation and they did not blame anyone. The government of Sweden did the exact same thing. They briefly launched an investigation and then quietly closed it without blaming anyone.
Getting started to invest can be confusing. Picking stocks on your own can be...
Quietly closed it without blaming anyone. Now, mere hours after the pipelines were blown up, the prominent Polish politician Radek Sikorski tweeted a photo of the sabotage, and he said, quote, "Thank you, USA," end quote. Sikorski was previously both the defense minister and the foreign minister of Poland, and he's closely linked to the U.S. government. He's a close ally of the U.S., and his wife is the neoconservative U.S. columnist Ann Applebaum, who is closely linked to the U.S. State Department. So the fact that he was publicly celebrating and thanking the United States was very symbolic. But today, in 2025, it seems like so many people have forgotten about this incident that only happened 3 years ago, and now Donald Trump is in the White House and boasting of how he ended the pipeline while he sits in the front of the leader of Germany, and it's not even a big news story. I didn't see any major media outlets cover these comments made by Trump, because really it's so normalized, this idea that the U.S. treats its so-called allies in Europe like vassals.
There you go.
Because again, this project Nord Stream was launched by Germany. It was actually originally not a Russian idea. It was an idea that was pushed by German industrialists during the previous government of the longtime Chancellor Angela Merkel. Because Germany has historically been a major industrial power, although U.S. policies are leading to rapid deindustrialization of the German economy, along with the U.S. pushing for Europe to have an extremely antagonistic line against China. So all of these U.S. policies are exploiting Europe, benefiting U.S. corporations at the expense of Europe, and they're sabotaging Europe's relationship with its most important trading partner, China, and what was previously its most important energy partner, Russia. And that was why Angela Merkel wanted cheap energy from Russia in order to power industry in Germany. But Donald Trump himself admitted in this meeting with Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz that he instead wants Germany and the rest of Europe to buy oil and gas from the United States, not from Russia. Trump recalled a conversation he had with the previous German Chancellor Merkel, in which he complained that the U.S. military was supposedly protecting Germany. The U.S. has thousands of troops and many military bases in Germany. And Trump complained and he said, "You are paying billions of dollars for oil and gas from Russia. Instead, you should be buying that oil and gas from U.S. companies."
But I'm the one that stopped the pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 2. Until I came along, nobody ever heard, not one person in this room ever heard of Nord Stream 2. You probably did, because it went to Germany. He's the only one that heard.
This was a mistake.
But I stopped it. Yeah, and you've said that openly.
Yeah.
It was a mistake because, and I used to go with Angela. I say, well, wait a minute. We're spending all this money to defend you against Russia, and then you're giving Russia billions of dollars a month. What kind of a deal is that? Which was but you said it better than anybody else. I appreciate it. But I'm the one that stopped him. And that was the biggest economic development job, if you want to call it that, in the history, think of it, in the history of Russia. That was a massive, it's the biggest pipeline in the world. Going to go all over Europe, not only to Germany. They're Germany, but then they were branching off all over to Europe. Nobody ever heard of it. Not one person of you heard of it. And I stopped it. It was dead.
Back in 2019, during
And you hear how he boasting in that, right? That you blew up somebody's pipelines, not he didn't really do it because he wasn't even president at the time. Okay, but you get my point though. All right, boasting in their most expensive project being destroyed. Okay, and what was it? Three of the four Nord Stream pipes. Okay, were destroyed because you have, like I said, the two pipes. Got A and B. Then there's two and two, so it's four and three. Three of those were damaged. So that one. You can see how major of a setback that is, and so they're boasting. First they're speaking about the jealousy of it. Because of that pipeline being built, all right, that would have been a major, money grab for them, all right, straight from Russia to what was it, Germany, all right, and so then he's boasting about the destruction of it. Okay, so let's keep going though.
His first term as U.S. president, Trump imposed sanctions on any company that would work with the Russian gas giant Gazprom in order to complete the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. Again, the Nord Stream 1 pipelines were finished in 2011. The Nord Stream 2 pipelines were not finished until 2021, and they were never used because of the threats by the U.S. government. During Trump's first term, he was blatantly meddling in the internal affairs of Germany and essentially telling Germany that it could not continue to deepen its economic relations with Russia. And in 2018, as he was threatening Germany over the Nord Stream 2 construction, Trump referred to Germany as a captive of Russia, complaining that Germany was buying too much oil and gas from Russia. Because in reality, what Trump wanted is Germany and the rest of Europe to be a captive of the United States. He wanted to replace dependency on Russia with dependency on the US. And this is exactly what happened later. Of course, the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed in 2022. That was after Trump left office. Trump left office in January of 2021, and Joe Biden entered. But in February of 2022, Biden warned Russia, and he said, if you invade Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 will no longer exist. He said that the U.S. had ways to stop it, which was obviously a hint that Nord Stream would be destroyed, which it was in September, just a few months later. Listen to this very revealing clip from Biden.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer the Nord Stream 2. We will bring it in.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I know y'all remember that, right? So let's get back to this commercial.
I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
So again, this says so much about how the U.S. sees its relations with Europe, and not just under Trump and the Republicans, but also under Biden and the Democrats. They do not treat their so-called allies in Europe as leaders of sovereign, independent countries. They treat them as vassals. And we have video clips of two U.S. presidents boasting of how they ended and stopped a pipeline project that was built by multiple European companies in not only Russia, but also Germany, France, and the Netherlands. And it was sabotaged, and the U.S. government didn't care. It did not allow them to have their own independent commercial relations because the U.S. empire does not see Europe as its friendly partner, but as its subservient proxies. And the results of the sabotage of Nord Stream have been completely predictable. The U.S. has become the largest exporter of oil and liquefied natural gas to Europe. U.S. fossil fuel corporations have profited. As of the beginning of 2024, the United States provided nearly half, over 47%, of the liquefied natural gas, LNG, imported by the European Union. The U.S. also was the source of 17% of the petroleum oil imported by the EU. Using official EU data from Eurostat, I created charts that illustrate the massive shift in Europe's energy supply in the past few years. Throughout the 2010s, Russia was by far the largest exporter of oil to the EU. Russia exported over 10 times more oil to the EU than the United States did. But the situation changed completely in 2022 with the proxy war in Ukraine, which was not simply a war between Russia and Ukraine. It was a war between Russia on one side and NATO on the other. And of course, NATO is led by the United States. In response to that war, the EU boycotted Russian energy. And what was the result? The United States became the largest exporter of both oil and liquefied natural gas to Europe.
Now, before we continue real quick, I want to get into something before I forget it. And because what I punched up here is I punched up what is achievable with nuclear energy, right? And the reason why I pull this up is because speaking about which is not really talking about America, at least not directly, more so with the state of Israel, Iran, or whatever. They keep trying to say, oh, they're trying to go nuclear, they're trying to create this, that, and the third thing. All right, so let me read a little bit of this real quick. So it says, nuclear energy is a powerful and versatile energy source with potential to address significant global challenges, particularly in the realm of clean energy production and sustainable development. It is achievable to generate large amounts of reliable, carbon-free electricity, contribute to national security, and support various non-electric applications such as medical treatments and space exploration. All right, because they've not yet found what they accused them of. Okay, it says nuclear energy is generated through nuclear fission, a process where uranium atoms are split in a reactor to release heat, which then produces steam to drive turbines and generate electricity. This process is highly efficient. For instance, a single uranium fuel pellet, roughly the size of a peanut, can produce as much energy as 800 kilograms of coal. Okay, now I'm not big with measurements and stuff like that, but you see the significance of what we're speaking of. All right, key achievements: clean energy production. Nuclear power is a significant source of clean energy, producing virtually no greenhouse gas emissions during operation. Okay, so they really cared about, because they have this agenda of global warming and all these different carbon footprint, cow farts, and all this kind of craziness. Well, why don't you just achieve nuclear energy to make things more cleaner? But no, what they do with it, they make weapons, the WMDs, right? Let's read some more. Reliability and baseload power. Small environment footprint. Small environmental footprint. Nuclear power plants require significantly less land area compared to other clean energy sources for the same amount of electricity generation. A typical 1,000 megawatt nuclear facility needs just over 1 square mile to operate, whereas wind farms require 360 times more land, and solar photovoltaic plants 75 times more. Right? Because those turbines are freaking huge, and they're sometimes it'd be a whole bunch of them, just in a whole few huge open land, field or whatever. Okay, turning look like a house fan or whatever. Economic contributions to job creation. Nuclear industry supports nearly 500,000 jobs. Yeah. Advancement in reactor technology. Waste management, recycling. Non-electric applications. Nuclear technology extends beyond electricity generation, playing crucial roles in space exploration, powering spacecraft, medical diagnosis and treatment, radiostopies for imaging and cancer therapy, criminal investigation, identifying trace chemicals, and agriculture, pest control, and food preservation. Okay, challenges and ongoing efforts. You can read that if you want to. Yeah, so going nuclear ain't always about making bombs, man. But this is what you hear on the world stage, man. Okay, so I just want to pull that up real quick. I'm gonna leave this here because I got another question. I'm gonna ask it in a second here.
Previously, in the 2010s, Norway and Saudi Arabia were tied as the second largest exporter of oil to the EU. But a decade later, the US has overtaken Russia and Norway and Saudi Arabia as the #1 exporter. Something very similar happened with the EU's imports of natural gas. In the 2010s, the US basically did not export any natural gas to the EU, almost none. But as of 2023, the US is the second largest exporter of natural gas to the EU after Norway, which is actually in Europe. And Russia has gone from being by far the largest exporter of natural gas to the EU to now exporting comparatively little. However, the difference is even starker when you look at liquefied natural gas, LNG. Here, the US is by leaps and bounds the number one exporter to the EU. And this is because the US can't send gas on a pipeline across the Atlantic Ocean. That would just be too far. That's what Norway does, because again, Norway is in Europe and it sends natural gas through a pipeline. But instead, companies from the US liquefy natural gas, they put it on ships, they send it across the Atlantic, and Europe.
Today, a simple alert will weave a new tale of compassion. Oreo and elderly schnauzer poodle mix.
By natural gas, they put it on ships, they send it across the Atlantic, and Europe imports it. And it's more expensive. So Europe is now importing much more expensive LNG from the US. US corporations are profiting, and it's even worse for the environment. It's making climate change even worse. And while we're on the subject of the environment, I should point out that the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines was an ecocidal event, completely catastrophic for the environment. The United Nations reported that the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines resulted in the planet's largest ever human-caused release of methane, which is a greenhouse gas that is even worse than carbon dioxide in terms of exacerbating climate change. So this was a complete catastrophe for the planet. Now, speaking of Western hypocrisy vis-a-vis climate change, the German government had to reopen coal-fired power plants because it had a shortage of energy due to, one, its boycotting of cheap Russian energy, and two, because Germany shut down its nuclear plants. When it comes to climate change, coal is by far the worst source of energy. It emits more carbon dioxide than all other sources of energy. And on the other side, you know what emits the fewest emissions? Nuclear. Nuclear is the cleanest, greenest form of energy there is.
As we just read, there's a reason why I pulled that up. I kind of jumped the gun there, but, you still get it, okay?
And yet, ironically, it was the so-called Green Party of Germany that advocated for closing down all of the green nuclear power plants, and now Germany is reopening extremely anti-green coal plants. And also, the so-called Green Party of Germany is extremely pro-war, extremely militarist, extremely pro-NATO, anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine. All of these policies are anti-green. They've made climate change much worse and done significant damage to the environment. In addition, of course, to the millions of lives that have been lost due to these militaristic policies. This just shows how much of a joke the so-called Green Party of Germany is. However, I should point out that not all green parties in the world are like this. In the US, for instance, the US Green Party is very progressive, very anti-war, and the US Green Party recognizes that the US military is the single largest consumer of oil on Earth and one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters on Earth. So you cannot support the US military and NATO in war and also actually care about the environment and opposing climate change. It's a completely contradictory policy. In fact, even the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a hawkish anti-Russia think tank, acknowledged that Europe is becoming a vassal of the United States in a policy paper called The Art of Vassalization. And it talked about how the proxy war in Ukraine has given the US even more leverage and influence over Europe's affairs. And this is not some kind of fringe anti-war group in Europe. This is a very mainstream think tank, the European Council on Foreign Relations. It is funded by multiple EU member states. These are the elites of Brussels who are complaining about the fact that they've lost more and more of their independence. And what is the goal of the U.S. empire in all of this? Well, it was spelled out very clearly by the late U.S. imperial strategist Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was extremely influential in U.S. foreign policy circles, and he served as the U.S. government's national security advisor under President Jimmy Carter. In 1997, Brzezinski published the book The Grand Chessboard: American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. He wrote this a few years after the overthrow of the Soviet Union, and in this book, he boasted that the U.S. was the only superpower in the world and that the U.S. had a global empire that controlled pretty much every major region of the world. And he talked about strategies that the U.S. empire could use to prevent the rise of another superpower that could challenge the unipolar dominance of the United States. This was the unipolar moment. And in this book, Brzezinski warned about potential scenarios that could lead to challengers to U.S. global dominance. He wrote, quote, "The United States may have to determine how to cope with regional coalitions that seek to push America out of Eurasia, thereby threatening America's status as a global power," end quote. And Brzezinski's imperialist view of the world was influenced by the British imperial strategist Mackinder, one of the fathers of geopolitics, who was theorizing ways for the British Empire to exercise control over the world. And Mackinder famously argued that Eurasia was the center of the world island and that empires needed to control Eurasia in order to control the world. And this was something that U.S. imperial strategists borrowed from British imperial strategists.
Have you noticed your Android phone getting slower over time? That's a serious red flag that your phone...
Imperial strategists after World War II. Now, in this book, Brzezinski warned of the possibility of, quote, a European-Russian accommodation to exclude America from the continent, end quote. And he outlined what he saw as a dangerous scenario, which was, quote, the possibility of a grand European realignment involving either a German-Russian collusion or a Franco-Russian entente, end quote. So he was really concerned about the possibility of Germany and Russia forming an alliance or France and Russia forming an alliance. This is something that the U.S. empire has long been very afraid of, especially considering that Germany has an advanced manufacturing sector and Russia has huge supplies of cheap energy, so their partnership makes perfect economic sense. And in fact, this was one of the main reasons for the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, during the first Cold War against the Soviet Union. Washington was afraid...
In which we know NATO is part of that beast system, all right? Going back to mentioning the vassals, right? You have America, which is Babylon, the great revival of the ancient Roman Empire. Then you have the NATO and the EU. The NATO is the military aspect of that whole beast system, and the EU is that monetary aspect of this whole beast system, okay? Let's keep going, though. We're almost through here.
That the new government in Germany could potentially have good relations or even an alliance with the Soviet Union. Of course, East Germany was an ally of the Soviet Union. So if you go to the NATO website, they openly admit this. They quote the first ever Secretary General of NATO, Lord Ismay, who famously said that NATO was created, quote, to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down, end quote. And today this remains the goal of NATO, to keep Russia out, the Germans down, and the U.S. on top, allowing the U.S. empire to subordinate the previous European empires to the U.S. empire.
Going back to MAGA,
and this strategy has obviously been doing significant damage to the economy of Europe. You now even have mainstream Western media outlets warning of the growing deindustrialization of Germany, which is the economic motor of Europe. And the reason for the deindustrialization of Germany and the economic problems is in large part due to the new Cold War against China and also Russia. The boycotting of cheap Russian energy, which was needed to power German industry and to make it competitive, but also the very antagonistic position that the West has taken against China. How the US has pressured Europe to attack China. So where is Germany going to export its cars? The German car industry has relied for decades on the massive Chinese market of 1.4 billion people. And yet now, more and more, the German government has been criticizing China, taking a hard line against China under pressure by the United States. And therefore, the German political class is doing damage to its own economy, antagonizing its largest trading partner at the behest of Washington.
And we know that's a recycled tactic of Babylon the Great, where if they don't like something that's going on, okay, we're going to give you option A or option B. And if you don't like option A or option B, then we're going to go with option C, which is option C is we're going to do what we want to do anyways and just roll over you, just steamroll over you, all right, to get it our way anyways, okay? And then when you go along with option A or maybe you decide to go with option B, what happens is, you get backdoored on them, okay? They always, stab you in the back, or if it's not exactly that, they make use of you for their benefit, and you're not really making any gain from there, okay?
So this raises a fundamental question. Why is the European political class so dedicated to Atlanticism, to this cross-Atlantic, transatlantic alliance between the US and Europe, especially at a moment like now when the Trump administration is openly attacking Europe and spitting in the face of European leaders? And yet, what is their response? They're literally crying. The chairman of the Munich Security Conference broke out in tears in public in response to J.D. Vance's speech attacking him. I mean, this is the pitiful situation of the leadership in Europe, which is literally crying like children because they refuse to grow a spine and stand up to the U.S. empire. And honestly, I think a big reason for this is economic. These European elites have sold out their own countries, their own populations, their own working class for their own economic interest. Rich Europeans have invested trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth into U.S. assets, especially in the U.S. stock market. As of 2024, Europeans owned around 15% of the total market capitalization of U.S. equities, of the U.S. stock market. And European investors have plowed into U.S. assets, especially in the past decade, and in particular in the past few years, especially big tech stocks from the Magnificent Seven, these corporations like Meta and Apple and Amazon. European capitalist elites have invested much, much more than the elites of any other region of the world. In Asia, some of the elites have definitely invested in the U.S. stock market, but Europe has taken it to a whole new level, investing trillions and trillions of dollars. And European capitalists hold huge parts of their wealth, their portfolio, in U.S. assets. They are extremely overweight U.S. assets. So it's in their economic interest to continue to subordinate their countries and their economies to the U.S. because it serves their bottom line. They don't want to be more independent of the U.S. because they're all in. If foreign investors start to sell their U.S. assets, their stocks and U.S. bonds and real estate, it could lead to a significant fall, even a collapse in the price of U.S. stocks, of U.S. real estate, of U.S. bonds, which would hurt the portfolios of all of these elites. Would hurt the portfolios of all of these elites in Europe. Of course, there are also cultural reasons and historical reasons. Many elites in Europe, many politicians studied at elite universities in the United States, and they are close friends with people with elites in the United States. But honestly, I think a lot of this has to do with their economic interests. As European economies...
I'm going to stop it right there. You can listen to it. Let me pull it up for you. You can listen to the rest of this video if you want. I want to go and try to sum up, what I wanted to get into. We actually pretty much watched the whole video almost, so we watched a lot more than I wanted to. But it's all good. Little good bits of information here and there and there. It says Trump brags, I ended Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany, making EU dependent on U.S. oil and gas. All right, so we're all familiar with that when that occurred. Okay, but I want to sink my teeth into. Oh, let me go back real quick because which he goes into some good topics from time to time. What's his name? Something Ben Gordon or something like that. I'm not sure. I forgot what he said his name was. He says his name at the end of this video. For those of you that name want to know. But from Geopolitical Economy Report. All right, so you can check this guy out here. So I want to pull up this. All right, which you saw me type this in. What is a vassal state? Okay, this is a vassal state is a state that has a mutual obligation to a superior state or empire. What's the empire? Babylon the Great. It has a superiority over these other countries. Okay, similar to a vassal in the feudal system of medieval Europe. These states often have a degree of autonomy, but are subordinate to a more powerful entity in various aspects. That's what we call the world stage. Okay, there's the world stage, and then behind the curtain, everybody is in agreement, with the banking families. Okay, because you can't tell me that all these, these different countries who are enemies are sitting at one location, talking and chopping it up with each other, agreeing on certain things. Okay, now I'm not saying that there's no, because there's where someone might send a messenger to another kingdom and say, okay, we want to have peace, and see what that king says. The king says, okay, we want to have peace. Then they'll set up some stipulations and stuff like that, and eventually probably meet, solidify it. And now it's like, all right, so neither one of us is going to attack each other. The one that attacks each other, you broken this treaty that we made. You broken our pact, and so we're going to go to war. Okay, but as you see, look at the world stage today, man. Okay, but it says these states often have a degree of autonomy, but are subordinate to a more powerful entity in various aspects, including military, political, and economic matters. The relationship between a vassal state and its superior is often defined by agreements and policies set by the dominant power. You see, which is why America can operate as a bully, say certain things, do certain things, and it seems like they're getting away with it. We're going to pull it up in the scriptures real quick in a second here. While the specifics of these relationships vary, common elements included the payment of tribute and the provision of military service. The degree of independence and benefits afforded to vassal states also differed depending on the circumstances. Today, terms like puppet state, protectorate, client state, associated state, or satellite state are more commonly used to describe similar relationships, but at the end of the day, they're still vassal states. A vassal state is a country that has limited power and only has the rights and privileges that a more powerful country has given to it. It says it is a part of a larger state or empire and has a local ruler or king, but does not enjoy full sovereignty. The historical examples of vassal states include those within the empires of the Near East, such as during the conflicts between Egypt, the Hittites, the Mitanni, as well as in ancient China. The kingdom of Byblos, for example, was a significant vassal state of Egypt, facilitating trade and military activities. The Hittite Empire also incorporated numerous vassal states, particularly in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, and northern Syria. South of that, with relationships centered on treaties and obligations to the Hittite king. The Neo-Assyrian Empire utilized vassal states, allowing them a degree of cultural independence while maintaining control through tribute and displays of power. All right, so I'm going to say that word vassal state. Now, what I want to do is pull up. Man, time is flying. Pull up Revelation chapter 17. All right. As a matter of fact, let me pull up 18 real quick because we quoted from 18. Jump down here real quick. See, lament for Babylon. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth, which are all these other countries that bring shipments and, on the ports over here, do business here, all right, especially China, okay? The bike I have is made from China. A lot of things you'll see made from China, made in Japan, made in Taiwan, most things that come into America are from overseas, okay? So when the things stop, especially when you're dealing with, particular supplies or food or whatever the case may be, it's going to get real shaky for Babylon the Great, okay? And that's known as the time of Jacob's trouble. It says, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buy their merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and of fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble. And all these things are what? Businesses, companies, okay? Things that generate money, and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and I get it, pick it up. Frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men, because America is indulging those things. Sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, people go missing. Organ harvesting, all these different things. Okay, different kidnappings that happen, and they seem to be able to find a little Ray under a house. Okay, in the deepest neighborhood, but they can't find a little girl. That got scooped up from her elementary school. Well, that's Babylon the Great for you. All right, there's no real justice here. Okay, there's a great perversion of justice here. And we're not going to get true justice till Yahushua comes. It says, and the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and thick with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour, so great riches has come to nothing. And every shipmaster, see, all these, port cities and ports and boats and stuff that come over these cargo ships, and every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea, you see, stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. Okay, so the destruction of Babylon the Great is where these nations are finally going to cry, okay, and finally realize what has been done, and they're going to be the ones to do it, which goes to show you the Lord is in control, because they're going to be the ones to destroy Babylon, but they're also going to be the ones to cry over Babylon when they're the ones that destroyed it. So the Lord is in control. Rejoice over her, thou heaven and ye holy apostles and prophets, for the Most I had to avenge you on her, on Babylon the Great. Avenge you on Babylon the Great by destroying this place, because this is the last place of our captivity before the Lord comes and delivers us. So I want to jump back to chapter 17 to get the points that we wanted. Verse 15, we'll start right here. And he said unto me, Revelation chapter 17 and 15, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth, the whore is talking about Babylon the Great, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, which some of those were mentioned in that video, a few of those, right? And today you have, it's just like he said, vassals, okay? And that's why we're reading this to make the point here. It says, upon the beast, the whole system that's set up, you got the America, NATO, EU, that really formulates the beast system. And I mean, I guess you could throw State of Israel in there somewhere. They're really the ones that have America in their back pocket. But NATO, EU, okay, and Babylon the Great. These shall hate the whore. The whore's talking about Babylon. And shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And that's what we were just reading in Revelation, the 18th chapter. The destruction of Babylon the Great by nuclear missiles by the same allies, NATO, EU, and the enemy of Babylon the Great, which are the BRICS nations and all those that join themselves with the BRICS nations, which you can read about in Ezekiel, the 38th chapter. Okay? And also parts of that war you can read about in, I believe it's Second Ezra, the 14th chapter or 15th chapter. So it says, they shall hate the whore and shall make her desolate and naked and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Here's the point right here in verse 17. For the Most High had put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, which is what? We just read it. Vassal states, as he just mentioned in the video as well. Okay, to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of the Most High should be fulfilled. So that moment, their power, they say, we're taking our power back, if you want to put it that way. That's the moment where they're going to decide to launch the missiles on Babylon the Great. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, Babylon the Great, aka America, the rival of the ancient Roman Empire, okay, which reigneth over the kings of the earth, okay, is destroyed. See? The other places are vassals unto them. Okay? And this is why we're gonna jump over here. The other scripture. That's what I want to get right here. Speaking about how they treat their allies and things of that nature. Should be in Jeremiah. Let me just go and find it quicker. Yeah, here we go. Jeremiah. There's two of them. And here we go. Jeremiah 50. Okay. Jeremiah 50:21. Go up against the land of Merathaim. Let's talk about America. All right. The root word there was mar, which means bitter. Okay. America is bitter. It's named after, what's his name? Amerigo Vespucci. Okay. Even against it. And at least it's bitter for us because we're in captivity. And we just happen to be in captivity here in Babylon, of all places, the hub of our captivity. All right. Even against it. And against the inhabitants of Pekah, waste and utterly destroy after them, saith the Lord Yahweh, and do according to all that I have commanded thee. See, Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is in the hands of the Lord, and as the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. He's commanded these nations to do what they do. He put it in their brains to make the nuclear missiles and or whatever else to amplify their military, you know, their submarines, their choppers, their jets, or whatever, amplify all these things in their weaponry and technology for the day of World War III. Joel chapter 3, Zephaniah 3 and 8. My determination is to gather the nations. Okay, it says, and utterly destroy after them, saith the Lord Yahweh, and do according to all that I have commanded thee. A sound of battle is in the land, and of great destruction. How is the hammer of the earth, whole earth that is, cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon the Great destroyed? How this place that says we're going to make it great again, or we're the greatest this, the greatest that, we're the richest this, we got the most that, we got the greatest military, all this great stuff. Well, how are you destroyed? You see? How are you destroyed? Same thing it says in Isaiah 14, man. Oh, Lucifer, son of the morning, you brought down from, you know, that did weaken the nations. How you brought down? See? Same thing in Revelation 12, all right? Michael and his angels fought, and their place was found no more in heaven, meaning no more in power. All these verses coincide with one another and talk about the destruction of Babylon the Great and the bringing down of their leaders, which stems back to the banking families, all right? How is the hammer of the earth? Let's get the word hammer, see what it says there. Forge hammer. So it's pretty much straightforward there. Look, it's a pound, hammer, all right? But that's how they treat the other nations, including their own allies, man. All right, making threats to them, at them. So, what the one threat Trump made, I would encourage Russia to attack whoever it was, because they're not they're lacking in their defense spending. Well, wait a minute, you forgot you're talking to your own allies, but they're the hammer of the earth, and the other nations that are under them are vassal states to them. And then you have the whole opposite side, which is the BRICS nations and those that are joining themselves to them. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How was Babylon become a desolation among the nations? I have laid a snare for thee. They are also taken, O Babylon, and thou wast not aware. Thou art found and also caught, because thou hast striven against the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahushua. That goes right back to Revelation chapter 18, where it says your sins have reached unto heaven. Okay, so I just wanted to get a couple of scriptures there, all right, just to to fully bring home and make the point, and also want to end with scriptures instead of jumping in there, let the video play, then end with the scripture. So that'll be the most fresh thing on your mind of the whole point of why we played the video in the first place. So I won't prolong it any more than I need to force it. Lord willing, you will edify. To next thing I'm going to say, Shalom.